Absolutely. Women become doormats when they let people jump all over their boundaries over and over, not just once.
And you might wake up one day and realize, oh my gosh, like I feel like he's wiping his boots on me. In some cases, it may not be something that he's even aware of. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Fascinating Womanhood channel, where we talk about all things that have to do with femininity and building strong relationships. I am Cherry Lynn and I'm here with my mom, Dixie Andelin Forsyth. Hi. I am so excited to be here in my mom's house to film a video for you today for our channel. For those of you that watch us all the time, you know we're always remote from each other. I live in Chicago, she lives in Missouri, and this is so special that we can be here in the same room together.
It's really fun. Yeah.
So we're so excited. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be talking about boundaries today. We've had so many requests for this subject, and I think the only reason why we haven't done it is because we have tried to wrap our heads around how to articulate all the different challenges around boundaries. So we're really excited to tell you today that we have 3 main areas that we want to focus on with boundaries.
There are many different areas of boundaries, but in relationships, we all understand them intuitively when somebody crosses our boundary.
Yeah.
We know it. But sometimes we don't always know that other people have their boundaries, and the key to it is to be sensitive to it, because you can absolutely destroy a relationship, and even friendships, by jumping boundaries too much.
Why are we talking about boundaries? I mean, Fascinating Womanhood is about marriages and relationships and femininity. Where does the subject boundaries kind of fall into that?
Because in any relationship, particularly in the closest of relationships, which is your marriage, you and your spouse will still have their individual boundaries, where you really shouldn't, like for example, some people, husbands or wives, really don't like it if their spouse looks at their email or looks at their phone. And if that's really important to them, the other one should respect it. Mm-hmm. It isn't true of all people. For instance, Bob and I don't care if we look at it. For one thing, we're not suspicious of each other. Mm-hmm. And some people, even if they're not suspicious, it's just their private thing.
I think my takeaway from all of that is that boundaries are important to Fascinating Womanhood because they affect your relationship more than you may realize. Mm-hmm. They're not just, oh, you got into my bubble, you're annoying me. You know, it's not about being irritated. It's actually about a lot of different things, and it actually we get very deep into the subject.
That leads to trust.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about 3 really important points with boundaries today, and we're going to talk about what they mean, what kind of examples that they might look like in case it's a little difficult to understand how that would apply to you. And then we're going to talk about what happens or what might happen if you're crossing that boundary. So the first one is the most common one, which is physical boundaries.
We all know what that is. And it doesn't occur as much in marriage, although it could. It could be sleeping habits and things like that. But I'm sure you've had the experience where somebody you don't know and real well comes up too close to you and kind of feels like they're getting in your face or too close when they're talking to you, and you find yourself wanting to back away.
Or someone goes in for a big bear hug and you kind of just wanted a little hug.
or it's the relative that hardly ever comes and they wanting to hug you, want you to kiss them on the cheek or whatever, and you don't want to do it.
Okay,
you see it all the time, and that's what we call your bubble. And people invading your bubble, you don't want them to.
I think also with physical boundaries, I think it also can apply to your space. So touching my things, you're touching my laundry, you're touching my things, or you're walking into my room without asking. Like those all fall under physical boundaries. Things where you feel physically unsafe.
And those are in marriage and outside of marriage. And the key to it is to learn ourselves to be sensitive when people have these reactions, like they kind of even if they don't take a step back, if they lean back even slightly, you know you've invaded their bubble and you just correct it.
In Fascinating Womanhood, we're always striving for this ideal woman. We're striving to be the best that we can be. So why do boundaries fall into that? Well, what happens when you are not aware that you are possibly crossing this physical boundary? What are some problems that can come with that?
First thing is erosion of trust. If somebody either says to you or physically indicates to you by the behavior that you've crossed the boundary and you do not respond, then trust starts to be a little bit eroded.
Okay, so
and they start to put up their own, in Fascinating Womanhood we call it like a wall of reserve.
Yeah, it's like they put a wall up when
emotional
around you.
We all have experienced this. We just don't want to be part of the problem.
I think too with the wall, if you're thinking about this in a marriage, if you are accidentally violating this physical boundary with your husband, you don't realize it, he may stop opening up to you. He may just slowly not tell you things. Mm-hmm. And you might wake up one day and be like, what happened? These are the easiest ones. Right? These are the easiest ones. So the next one is emotional boundaries. And I think that when we were preparing this video, we talked about this specific part for probably 25-30 minutes. We just kept going on because this is probably the biggest one.
How people feel and hurting people's feelings, doing the things that wound them. We can give extreme examples that I'm sure you would never do. At least in this culture, we're from the United States. In our culture, it is not polite to ask people how much they weigh. And that's extreme because in some cultures it's perfectly fine. Or how old you are. So if you persist on doing that, you might hurt someone's feelings. You might, if you tell somebody that have you gained weight, or you're sure looking old, or
you're sure looking bald these days.
Yeah,
what happened to your hair? You'd be surprised how many people say that. I hear it around me constantly, and not to me, but like I see other people doing it, and I feel sad for that person.
Well, there's so many ways to do this.
And
that's
some
what we
people,
talked about.
some people have that like as a culture in their family. So I think that's fine if that's a culture in your family and it truly is a joke. That's fine, but just being careful and realizing that, is this going to sound a little hurtful? Maybe I should let this person, give them a little break or something.
Well, if your husband is really stressed about something, anything, or really tired, berating him for being tired is, or what's the matter with you? Why can't you do this or that? That's an emotional boundary that you've crossed.
Telling someone's child that they need to lose weight.
Or that they're just overweight.
Or they're overweight, or commenting on your children's the way they dress, or the way you dress. We talked a little bit about kids because sometimes people cross boundaries with your kids. And then it causes issues with you. And you might even cross boundaries with your spouse who parents your kids as well and say things about the kids that maybe you are directly tied to. And I know that sounds incredibly vague, but for those of us that have experienced it, you probably know what I mean.
Yes, okay, Bob and we're very compatible, but there were a couple of things that I was very uncomfortable with, like when our kids were teenagers. He felt that our boys particularly, that they should be, that if he had confidence in their driving skills, then they should be able to drive from here to Canada, where his family lived, by themselves
at 16.
And I was not comfortable with that. And he said, you should trust them. I said, I trust them. I don't trust the other drivers. Mm-hmm. And so I was so worried about one of our sons that wanted to drive to Canada. I said, if he could even drive with somebody, a brother or a cousin or somebody, I could stand it. But not, and this was before cell phones, but not without. So we had a discussion. We finally agreed on it because I just said, I just can't stand it. I'll be a nervous wreck. So that's where he felt like him having confidence in our son was the main thing that was required. Not if he has car problems, if he needs help, if a weirdo. And I think there's too many weirdos around.
But I think the key that I'm hearing in that story is that most women and most parents, most mothers, would have pushed that and said, no, it's not happening. And why is that a boundary issue?
Because it invalidates his opinion.
Right.
Which he grew up with in his family. It was different. and I was very protected in mine, and so we had to blend that together.
And I think a lot of people out there would hear that story and not think it's a boundary problem, but it actually is when you look back at the background, at their backgrounds and how they were raised and how they choose to parent. So that's a really good example, and I think that could apply to so many different ones. But I think learning some of these things, especially with the emotional boundaries, can actually be so freeing if you can learn it.
Absolutely.
Nobody's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, but if you can kind of be more aware of this, it's going to result in so many less arguments. And you guys came up with a happy in between that made both of you comfortable. So
what happened is he took someone with him.
Another thing we talked about with emotional boundaries, prying into someone's past, prying into how much they paid for the item they're wearing, just being a little bit too
asking
assertive.
someone if their real chest or if they've had plastic surgery, things. Some people actually ask things like that. Have you had plastic surgery? That is not appropriate.
Some people are fine sharing those things, but the point in bringing them up is that it does fall under boundaries with some people.
So you need to know their boundaries before you ask that.
Yes. Another one we have in here is being cheeky. Do you want to talk about
My mother used to talk about that all the time. And
all our UK ladies will like that.
Cheeky, in my mother's language to me that I understood, she said, don't go over to your friend's house and tell them you're hungry and ask for food. That's cheeky. Mm-hmm. It's expecting someone to do something for you that is kind of unreasonable. It's asking for it. If they offer, great. But if they don't ask them.
Another one, this is a little bit more of the serious part of emotional boundaries, is self-esteem.
You can very much, without meaning to, damage someone's self-esteem by saying things that are jumping their boundaries, like, boy, you sure look, what happened to you? You look terrible. Mm-hmm. Have you been sick? You can hurt their self-esteem. And you would never want to do anything to hurt anybody's self-esteem. None of you would.
One of the biggest problems that comes from crossing emotional boundary lines is self-esteem is suffering. What other things come from crossing emotional boundaries other than self-esteem being damaged?
Your relationship being damaged. But I need to say, too, that it isn't usually one cross. It's not like you can never make a mistake, because we all do, and so we can learn from our mistakes and say, I'm never doing that again. I'm never going to ask anybody their age again, for example. Or if they're expecting a baby and they aren't, that's one of the worst, if you've ever made that mistake. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't necessarily have to destroy your relationship. Just don't keep doing it. Mm-hmm. And one of the side effects of doing it over and over is people aren't going to want to be around you. They think, I don't know why, but I just don't feel like being around that person.
To me, another really big problem that results from constant emotional boundaries being crossed is you might be the person, or or the other person might be the person. Either party might be taken advantage of. And I think this is a big one that happens a lot, especially the ladies that follow us. They tell us these stories in their marriage and how they're struggling with different things, and the conclusion that we often come up with is, well, I think he's crossing boundaries with you. He's walking all over you. And it causes this person, this woman, to kind of say to themselves, well, I don't know what else to do, and feel very defeated because they're almost kind of becoming a bit of a doormat.
Yeah, absolutely. Women become doormats when they let people jump all over their boundaries over and over, not just once.
And you might wake up one day and realize, oh my gosh, like I feel like he's wiping his boots on me. And I'm not saying that it's always that case, and we're not trying to say bad things about men. There are some bad men out there, but in some cases it may not be something that he's even aware of. But that's why learning this, it's really important to learn those boundaries so that your emotional boundaries don't cause your self-esteem to plummet, and therefore you suddenly find yourself in this doormat.
If you allow yourself to be stepped on over and over, because you have to actually allow it. If you let people cross your boundaries, and then you resent them for it, that it can really hurt your relationship. You can let people just totally take advantage of you, and that's allowing people to cross boundaries with you.
And then the third one is social boundaries. So what we're talking about with social boundaries are things like, this is pretty common, borrowing money, broken promises. You have some, I know, experiences with
Boy,
a lot of experiences with that one.
I wish I didn't.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, you can. I've had people, really nice people that I really liked, get in a pinch and then borrow money from us and say they'll pay it back, and they never do. And then they start being uncomfortable being around us, and it wasn't worth it. I've even tried saying, "Look, I know there's this issue. Let's just forget it. I think it's going to be too hard for you to pay it back, so we'll just forgive the debt." They're still not comfortable.
Yeah.
And so it can really ruin your relationship. So you have to be careful that if you do loan money to people, that you're willing to be a bill collector.
And
in some cases.
this also applies to dating. I've heard a lot of ladies say, "Hey, I'm dating this guy. He came to me with this really specific scenario. He needs to borrow money from me." That's fine, and whatever that situation is, you need to navigate through it. But remember that can be a big boundary issue. If someone that you like, that you're dating, you may be in love, I'm not sure where you're at, but if they ask you for money, think about where that can go down the road.
Photobomb. Yeah.
Photobomb, yeah.
This one, to me, this money one, is just a high risk one. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be a catastrophe. It just means
you need to be careful.
This is a high risk boundary issue, so be careful.
Because it could destroy your relationship.
Exactly.
And knowing that and proceeding with it, if you decide to go ahead and do it, you feel pretty confident.
Yes, another big one with social boundaries, smartphone boundaries, getting into your anyone's really getting into anyone's phone that's not
email,
yours to
their
spy,
phone.
or to getting into their laptop to spy. We even talked about getting into diaries, getting into someone's diary and reading it. Even your children, going into your kid's room, reading their diary. I'm sure there's a lot of parents out there that think, "Well, I got to know what's going on." But just remember, again, high risk. We're not saying don't do it, never do it.
There better be a really good reason other than I want to know what's going on. I'm afraid they're dating the wrong person or something like that, because they could marry that person anyway, even if you do that. Those are high risk things, and some people deeply resent the invasion of that personal space.
For me, I don't open my husband's mail.
It's a respect that you have. It isn't because if you're married to him or you're a relative to them, it's all free. And this is, again, ladies, to preserve your relationship so you can have the best that you can possibly be. You can go ahead and, because we are going to make mistakes, all of us are, but realizing that the more we can be careful and respectful of others' boundaries and have them respect ours, the best relationships will be the result.
I once had a roommate that would always eat my food. Buy groceries at the same time. We go together, we pay separately, and then she would eat my food. It made me start hiding food from her.
I did that in college.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you have done that. And to me, being aware of the fact, okay, she's crossing boundaries, I can't trust her, it resulted in our friendship not being as strong. And I didn't trust other roommates after her because I was worried they were going to do the same thing. And then I ended up being that person that was like, well, why don't you trust me? I'm not going to eat your food, to another friend. So I think that's another result, is that you may do that and then down the road not trust anyone.
So the answer to that would have been is to address that with that person rather than, oh no, I don't want to cause a problem. Address it. You don't have to lose your temper or anything like that. Just say, I really don't like it. Please don't do this. It's very uncomfortable for me. I don't like it.
Yeah, I think the answer, if you are someone out there watching this and you're saying, oh, well, I do feel like boundaries are constantly being crossed now that I'm watching all this, like, I need to stand up for myself, or I need to make some rules for myself. There's a peaceful way to handle all of this.
It's better when you do it,
way to handle.
And when you do it
this
on the spot is better than 6 months later. Hey, when you did that, it really bugged me. Then they think you've been stewing on it, and then it's kind of built up, and then you think, gee, all that time you had bad feelings about me. So it's better to do it and more girlish to do it when it happens. And that may be hard for some of us, and that's okay too. You can gradually.
And at the end of the day, don't be discouraged if this is something that you struggle with. I'm sure everyone at some point in their life have struggled with one of these or all of these or several of these points that we're talking about today. This takes a lot of practice. No one is perfect.
And that's okay.
It's okay. And we hope that you identified with some of the things we said, definitely if you have any questions, drop them down below. We try to answer every single comment. If you have a situation you're not sure if it's a boundary problem or you're not sure how to handle it, drop the question down below. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to check out at the bottom of this video all the places where you can find us. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. We have a really large forum on that group, as well as where to purchase Dixie's book, Fascinating Womanhood for the Timeless Woman, as well as her workbook. All of those links will be attached below. And we are here every week, so don't forget to check back with us next week. We will always have new videos coming out. If you have an idea for another video, you can also drop that down below. We would love to hear your ideas.
See you next time.
And we'll see you next time. Bye!